Imagine it is the year 1944. The Axis powers are being squeezed from all sides. To the east, a massive Soviet steamroller is pushing relentlessly forward. To the west, the Allies have successfully landed in Normandy and are breaking through the defenses. The skies above German cities are filled with Allied bombers turning industrial centers into rubble. It's a complete strategic nightmare. In a logical world, this is the part where you surrender and negotiate. But the leadership of the Third Reich wasn't known for being logical. Instead of facing reality, they turned to a magical word that promised salvation: Wunderwaffe, wonder weapons. The Nazi propaganda machine went into overdrive, promising the German citizens that victory was just around the corner. Secured by secret, invincible, technologically superior mega weapons that would wipe the enemies off the map. It was a brilliant psychological trick. But what exactly were these weapons? Were they actual technological marvels that came dangerously close to changing the course of history? Or were they just the desperate, incredibly expensive delusions of a failing regime? Today, we are going to look past the myths and the propaganda posters. We will examine three of the most famous Wunderwaffen, a gun the size of a building, a tank so heavy it broke the earth it drove on, and a rocket that accidentally started the space race. Spoiler alert, sometimes, bigger is definitely not better. It's actually much, much worse. To understand the Wunderwaffe, you have to understand the obsession with size. While the Allies and the Soviets were mass-producing reliable, easy-to-fix weapons like the Sherman tank or the T-34, the German High Command suffered from severe megalomania. They believed that a single, unstoppable supermachine could defeat thousands of smaller enemies. It's the classic villain trope from a comic book, but applied to real-world military procurement. The engineers were given blank checks and told to ignore basic laws of physics, logistics, and resource management. If an engineer said a tank should weigh 30 tons, the High Command demanded it be 100 tons. This obsession drained critical steel, rare metals, and brilliant engineering minds away from the practical weapons that the army actually desperately needed on the front lines. The result was a bizarre collection of prototypes and limited-run machines that looked incredibly intimidating on a blueprint, but were absolute logistical nightmares in the mud and snow of actual combat. Let's start with the most ridiculous example of over-engineering the world has ever seen. A weapon designed to smash through a wall that was practically already useless by the time the weapon was built. Get ready to meet the Schwerer Gustav. Meet Schwerer Gustav, the Great Gustav. It holds the record for the largest caliber rifled weapon ever used in the history of warfare, weighing in at a mind-boggling 1,350 tons. This wasn't just a gun, it was a mobile steel fortress. It fired shells that were 80 centimeters in diameter. Let me put that into perspective. A single high-explosive shell weighed almost 5,000 kilograms. That is the weight of an adult African elephant being hurled through the sky at supersonic speeds. A single armor-piercing shell could penetrate 7 meters of solid reinforced concrete. From 38 kilometers away, it was originally commissioned in the late 1930s for one specific job: to smash through the heavy fortifications of the French Maginot Line. It was supposed to be the ultimate bunker buster. But there was a tiny, hilarious problem. By the time this mechanical beast was finally built, tested, and ready for war in 1941, the German army had already invaded France by simply driving their fast tanks around the Maginot Line. The wall was conquered, and Gustav was suddenly the most expensive, devastating weapon in the world, with absolutely nothing to shoot at. So, what do you do with a giant gun that has no target? You send it to Russia. In 1942, Gustav was deployed to the siege of Sevastopol. And here is where the reality of the Wunderwaffe hits hard. Gustav couldn't just drive there. It had to be disassembled, loaded onto 25 special train cars, and transported across Europe. To fire the gun, they had to build a custom double railway track in a curve just to aim it. It took a crew of 250 men 3 full days just to assemble the weapon. But wait, it gets worse. To protect it from air attacks, load the massive shells, and maintain the tracks, it required a total support force of nearly 4,000 men, 4,000 soldiers, commanded by a major general, just to fire one gun. And its rate of fire, about 14 rounds a day. After firing roughly 300 shells, the barrel wore out and had to be replaced. At Sevastopol, it did destroy a massive underground ammunition dump, which is impressive. But strategically, it was a massive waste of manpower and resources. That could have equipped an entire division of normal artillery. It was a logistical parasite. If a giant gun on a train wasn't crazy enough, let's look at their tanks. The German Tiger and Panther tanks were already famous for being heavy and complicated. But the High Command wanted something bigger. Enter the Panzer VIII, affectionately named Mouse, or Mouse, a highly ironic name for a vehicle that weighed 188 tons. Designed by Ferdinand Porsche, yes, that Porsche, the Mouse was envisioned as a breakthrough tank. A rolling, impenetrable bunker. Its front armor was 220 mm thick. No Allied anti-tank gun of the era could even scratch it. It was armed with a massive 128 mm main gun. And a secondary 75 mm gun just for fun. On paper, it was invincible. One Mouse could theoretically hold off an entire battalion of enemy tanks. It was the ultimate expression of the Wunderwaffe philosophy, quality and thickness over quantity and mobility. The engineers worked frantically to solve the monumental challenges of moving a building made of solid steel. But as they would soon discover, physics is a cruel mistress, and mud does not care about your thick armor. The reality of the Mouse was a comedy of engineering errors. The biggest problem, the Earth itself, at 188 tons. The Mouse was too heavy for practically every bridge in Europe. If it wanted to cross a river, it literally had to drive underwater using a giant snorkel, powered by an electrical cable attached to a second Mouse safely on the shore. Assuming it didn't just sink forever into the riverbed mud. Then there was the engine. It required a massive aircraft-style engine, just to move at a top speed of 20 km per hour on a perfectly paved, flat road. Off-road, it moved at a walking pace and drank fuel at an astronomical rate. In a late-war Germany that was completely starved of oil, the Mouse was less of a tank and more of a stationary pillbox. Only 2 prototypes were ever built. They never saw a single day of combat. As Soviet forces advanced on the testing grounds, the German engineers were forced to blow up their own invincible tanks to prevent capture. The Soviets took the hull of one and the turret of the other, slapped him together, and it now sits quietly in a Russian museum, a monument to wasted genius. But not all Wunderwaffen were clumsy, heavy, and slow. Some were terrifyingly fast and genuinely revolutionary. This brings us to the V-2 rocket, or the Vergeltungswaffe, the Vengeance Weapon 2, developed under the brilliant but morally compromised scientist Wernher von Braun. The V-2 was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. It was a technological leap that changed humanity forever. Standing 14 meters tall and fueled by liquid ethanol and oxygen, the V-2 was launched straight up into the stratosphere. It reached an altitude of roughly 80 kilometers. Practically touching the edge of space, before falling back down toward its target at over 4,000 kilometers per hour. Over 3 times the speed of sound. Because it fell from space at supersonic speeds. There was no warning, no sirens, no airplanes to shoot down. You wouldn't even hear it coming until after the explosion had already happened. It was the ultimate psychological terror weapon, raining down on London and Antwerp. There was absolutely no defense against it. It was truly a weapon of the future. But the dark truth of the V-2 reveals the ultimate failure of the Wunderwaffe program. It was a strategic disaster. The rocket carried a relatively small warhead, less than 1,000 kilograms of explosives, for the immense cost of developing and building a V-2. Germany could have built several fighter planes they desperately needed to defend their own skies. But the most horrifying statistic is the human cost. The V-2 is the only weapon in human history that killed more people in its production than it did attacking the enemy. Built in horrific underground factories by enslaved concentration camp prisoners. An estimated 12 to 20,000 laborers died from starvation, execution, and disease just assembling them. The rockets killed roughly 9,000 people in their target cities. It was a weapon born of pure cruelty. When the war ended, both the Americans and Soviets scrambled to capture the V-2 technology and its scientists. Wernher von Braun went to America, eventually designing the Saturn V rocket that took humans to the moon. The Wunderwaffe failed to save the Third Reich, but ironically, its most terrifying creation laid the foundation for the space age.